Today's lesson 4.5, you can see our title. We'll be talking about really three different topics. Inflation will be our initial topic, and then we'll talk about personal income taxes, and then a brief mention about stocks and how they are evaluated. So in general, these are three ways that as you grow into adulthood, these are some areas of economic life that you need to pay attention to that are important. They do have an impact in us in one way, shape, or form, or on us. So let's start with this idea of inflation. Inflation is calculated using something called the Consumer Price Index, or we will refer to it as the CPI. It's a measure of the average price paid by most consumers for a what is called a market basket of consumer goods and services, and we're going to give some categories of what's involved in that market basket, and then we'll just touch on some specifics that fall underneath each category. So basically this market basket drives whether we have inflation, which is when the CPI goes up, or it could go down. In that case, we would have deflation. So that market basket would contain these categories. Food and beverages, you can think of groceries. That's pretty easy to grasp. Housing, all the individual cost involved in housing, whether that's buying a house, renting, those types of things. Apparel, clothing items for men and women. Transportation, the cost of getting from point A to point B. That could be gas prices, that could be airline tickets, all the different ways that we get around. The price of transportation drives the CPI. Medical care, whether that's the cost directly of getting medical attention or maybe the insurance that is paid in order to receive medical care. Recreation is another category, the cost associated with the different forms of recreation that we could engage in. Education and communication is one category. So tuition, fees, all the cost associated with education, and then communication, if you can understand, cell phone cost, computer, all the different communication areas. And then there's this one broad category, other goods and services. Under this would fall things like tobacco and smoking products. Hopefully those are not things that that would pertain to you. Personal services such as haircuts, hair salons, those types of things that we need, they would fall under the other goods and services. So let's do some math here. A little formula. Suppose the CPI increases this year from 200 to 205. What's the rate of inflation? So it's really just a percentage change in the CPI. Okay, so this is a review of percentage change that we did back in chapter 2. So the change in the CPI would be 5 points divided by the previous or the first CPI measurement, which is 200. And then times 100%, so that would be 2.5. So the answer with the rate of inflation is 2.5% based on the percentage change in the CPI. Here's another example. This time the CPI changed from 215 to 225. That's 10 points positive, and then divided by the original, which is 215, multiplied by 100%. And we end up with a rate of inflation of 4.7%. You can do all your rounding in this lesson to the nearest tenth. Okay, so that's how we can detect or determine rate of inflation given the change in the CPI. Well, what what this formula is telling us is, since we have inflation, the buying power of our dollar, as inflation goes up, the buying power of the dollar will decrease. It will go down. It's worth less money as inflation grows. So this formula will tell us the percent decrease in the buying power given an inflation rate. And this is a key. The inflation rate here in this formula is it's as a percent, not a decimal. Typically we're changing percent to decimal, but not here. Okay, so for number 3, the rate of inflation this year is 5%. So we do 100 times 5, that's 500. That's the I, divided by 100 plus 5. And then change this into a percent. So this would be, or do the division, and the answer is 4.8%. Okay, here's another example. The inflation rate is 6,500% in Venezuela, at least it was in 2020. So 100 times 6,500, that's 650,000. Divided by 100 plus 6,500, that's 6,600. So you do the division and you end up to the nearest tenth. That's 98.5% decrease in the buying power of the dollar with that high of inflation. Well, this is a formula that kind of flips it around. If we know the buying power of the dollar, what does that mean the inflation rate is? So it's kind of the flip side of the previous formula that we used. B here is the decrease in buying power, and again, just like our previous example, this is not a decimal. It's just entered in as a regular number. So 100 times B, 100 times 2.5, that's 250. Divided by 100 minus B, 100 minus 2.5 is 97.5. And in our calculator, we come up with, to the nearest tenth, that would be 2.6% would be the rate of inflation given the buying power. So here's that same formula again, 5.2% times 100, or 5.2 times 100 is 520. And then 100 minus 5.2 is 94.8. Do the division and you end up to the nearest tenth, that would be 5.5%. Okay, so here's an all-encompassing problem, basically taking all the formulas that we talked about. We need to go back and look. You'll need to go back and look at this table on page 76. So if you're not there, you just pause and make sure you're able to see the table, because I'm going to be taking numbers from it. And if you're not looking at the table, it'll be hard to see where these numbers are coming from. So hopefully you're there now. You've pulled up the table on page 76 on your text. So to find the 10-year inflation rate, we're going to use that formula that basically gives the percentage change in the CPI. So in 2013, the CPI was 233. In 2003, it was 184.3. So it's the difference divided by the first, or the original. And in our calculator, this will be times 100. So in our calculator, that would be 26.4%. Okay, if a sofa cost $100 in 2008 and the price changed in accordance with the inflation rate provided in the table, how much did the sofa cost in 2009? So in the table, it changed by 2.7%. So you would say 100, this is exponential growth, multiplied times 1.027. And the dollar amount then would be 102.70. Okay. If a chair cost $50 in 1953 and the price changed in accordance with the inflation rate, how much did the chair cost in 1954? We actually had deflation. If you notice, it went down negative 0.7% according to the table. So we're going to do exponential decay here, 50 times 1 minus the rate of decay. So 1 minus 0.007 is 0.993. And that gives us our amount of $49.65. So it's going to be a little bit cheaper the next year because we had deflation. Prices are going down. Doesn't happen very often. Okay, we're told in 2020 the rate of inflation in Lebanon was 85%. How much did the buying power of the currency in lira decrease that year? So this is our formula. So given inflation, what's the buying power? So we do 100 times 85 over 100 plus 85. So the formula that we just looked at a few minutes ago. And this to the nearest tenth would be 45.9%. So the final question here is, in Ethiopia, we're given the buying power. It decreased by 16.8%. What does that mean for the inflation rate? So this is that other formula where we do 100 times buying power divided by 100 minus buying power. And in our calculator, to the nearest tenth, that would be 20.2%. Okay, so let's move on to our next topic, income taxes, personal income taxes. The IRS provides tables for us to calculate personal income taxes, and it will depend on whether you're single or married. So we have one of each here. So let's fill in some blanks. Consider the following tax tables. This is old data, but the calculations are the same. The numbers will change from year to year, but the way you calculate taxes is the same. Note that the tax rates are applied to taxable income. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. What does it mean to have taxable income? The percentages in the tables are called marginal rates. We'll talk a little bit more about that too. And they apply only to earnings in excess. That's where we get the word marginal, in excess of a certain amount. These marginal rates increase as you earn more. So the more you make, the higher the rate. And as you move from one tax bracket to another. So this system of taxation where the marginal tax rates increase as the incomes increase, this is referred to as a progressive tax. So let's take a look at how these tables work. In the year 2013, Alex was single and had a taxable income of $70,000. How much tax did he owe? So I'm going to go to the single table, and I'm going to find out where $70,000 would fit. And it would fit right here. It's over $36,251, but it's less than $87,850. So that gives me a range of dollar amounts to fit the given number. So according to this range, I'm going to pay $49.91.25. And then I'm going to pay more based on the difference between the taxable income and $36,250. And that percentage is 25%. So in your calculator, you can add 25% of the difference of $70,000 and $36,250. So that's the way these tables work. So this can all be done in your calculator, but when you key this in, you're going to get the number 13,428.75. So hopefully you were able to get that. And that's how you work the tax tables that are provided. So let's use the tax tables again, but this time we're going to talk about two terms that come up with personal income taxes: deductions and credits. So here's the difference. A tax deduction lowers your taxable income, and that's good. That's a good thing. A tax credit, however, lowers your income tax owed. That's better, or we'll say best. So I'll illustrate these two with this scenario. In 2013, Betty and Carol were single. Each had a taxable income of $75,000. So Betty took a deduction of 10 but had no credit. So let's just take Betty's scenario here. She had what we would call gross income. She had a deduction. She took a deduction of $10,000. So we'll subtract that off. And this will become her taxable income. And that's what we put in the table. Okay, so let's go to our table and let's find out where 65,000 looks like we would be in the same range. So it would be very similar to what we did before. We would do 49.91.25 plus 25% of, this time we would do 65,000 minus the 36,250. And this would tell us that Betty is going to pay $12,178.75 for income taxes. Carol also had gross income of $75,000. She took a deduction of $9,000. So her taxable income is a little bit more. Okay, so let's go to the table and find out how much she possibly would owe based on 66,000. So again, a little refresher, we go back and we get 49.91.25 from the table, and then we add 25% of the difference between 66,000 and the 36,250. And we would end up with 12,428.75. Well, here's the difference between a deduction and a credit. A credit comes directly off the tax you owe. So we had 12,428.75, but we get to deduct from that $1,000. So Carol is actually she's only going to owe $11,428.75. So the big difference there between a credit and a deduction that I just want to get across: a credit comes directly off the tax amount that you potentially owe. A deduction lowers the taxable income. They're both good, but the credit has a greater impact on what you owe potentially. Okay, the Dow, let's talk about this. This is how stocks are reported, how we judge their value. A little bit of the history. This was created by Charles H. Dow back in the late 1800s, 1896. He came up with a Dow Jones Industrial Average. You'll see it as DJIA. And it's a benchmark to gauge the state of the value of stocks. Today, the Dow consists of 30 what we call blue chip. These are companies that have been around for a long time. They're trusted. They have great value. They've performed well over the years, the companies have. And these are stocks that are picked by the editors of the Wall Street Journal. Here's just a few. I'll just pick some of the ones that you would be more familiar with, but there's a total of 30 in all. But here's the key calculation point. For every $1 move in any of these stock prices, the Dow Jones Industrial Average changes by 6.58. That's a constant. So this is a pretty easy calculation. Let's assume that Walt Disney stock increased in value by $3 per share. if all the other stocks don't change at all, they remain the same, how does this affect the overall Dow Jones Industrial Average? So we take the increase in the Walt Disney stock, the $3, and we just multiply by this same amount, 6.58. And that number would be the number of points that the Dow Jones Industrial Average would increase. All right, so simple, it's 3 times 6.58. And so that would result in a 19.74 point increase in the Dow. So these problems are pretty easy. Just determine the change in one of the stocks, and that changes the overall average rating for the group by this same amount. Okay, that takes care of your notes for lesson 4-5. You're ready to practice, and if there's anything I can do to help you, please let me know. I'll see you next time.